Reopening the Strait of Hormuz, a number of countries say they will take action against Iran's near-total closure of this crucial shipping route. But with no end in sight to the war, what would make Tehran open the waterway, and is using force an option? This is Inside Story. Hello everybody, welcome to the programme. I'm Rishaad. Salamat. When the United States and Israel launched their joint offensive on Iran more than a month ago, Tehran moved quickly to block the Strait of Hormuz. Since then, the Revolutionary Guard has allowed some vessels to transit, but the majority, about 3,000, are stranded. And Iran is accused of holding the global economy hostage. On Thursday, the UK hosted a meeting of 40 countries to discuss the situation. The gathering yielded no concrete results except for an acknowledgement that further consultations were needed. In a moment, we talk to our panel about how the Strait of Hormuz and other vital shipping routes should be governed in times of war. But first, this report from Michael Apple.
To secure freedom of navigation and to reopen the strait.
More than 40 nations have met virtually to discuss a vital waterway that's throttling the global economy. The UK convened the gathering, condemning Iran for what the Foreign Secretary calls its reckless actions in the Strait of Hormuz.
We have seen Iran hijack an international shipping route to hold the global economy hostage.
The United States did not take part. President Donald Trump is frustrated that other nations, not party to the conflict in the Middle East, have refused to commit naval assets to secure the choke point.
Would love to have some help. If you could you please send ships immediately? No. We cannot do that, Donald. We can do that after the war is won.
That was an apparent imitation of the French president, who remains adamant that diplomacy and not military force is the solution.
This was never the option we supported because it is unrealistic. It would take forever and would expose all those who go through the strait to risks from the regime, but also ballistic missiles.
The global economy depends on a series of international waterways, regulated by maritime law. Ships carry everything from energy products and raw materials to food and manufactured products around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic highlighted just how sensitive economies are to supply chain disruption. Currently, attention is focused on the Strait of Hormuz. Before the war, an average of 150 ships a day transited the waterway, carrying 20% of global oil and liquefied natural gas exports. Now, Iran has effectively closed the strait, allowing only a handful of vessels through. Another potential flashpoint is the Bab el-Mandab Strait between Yemen and the Horn of Africa. Iran's ally, the Yemeni Ansar Allah movement, known as the Houthis, have previously disrupted up to 12% of global trade that transits the choke point, causing billions of dollars in losses. Egypt's Suez Canal is another critical route. It handles up to 30% of the world's container traffic, which in the past has been severely disrupted by conflict or maritime disasters. The 82-kilometer Panama Canal connects the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Up to 5% of global trade transits through the artificial waterway. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi recently told Al Jazeera that the Strait of Hormuz remains open, but only to friendly nations not involved in the conflict. The UK has documented more than 25 Iranian attacks on vessels since February the 28th. The blockade has stranded 3,000 ships, trapping more than 20,000 seafarers. Until they're able to continue on their journeys, the Strait of Hormuz will remain an economic and geopolitical flashpoint, and the fallout from the war will continue to ripple through the global economy. Michael Apple, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Well, let's bring in our guests. In the studio with me is Hassan Ahmadian, an associate professor at the University of Tehran. He specializes in Iranian foreign policy. Rockford Weitz is joining us from Medford in Massachusetts. He is the Maritime Studies Program Director at Tufts University's Fletcher School and a Professor of Practice teaching the law of the sea. And in Caracas is Craig Murray, a maritime specialist and former Maritime Section head of the UK's Foreign Office. Well, a warm welcome to each of you. Rockford, let's start off with you. Now, what is the legal status of the Strait of Hormuz?
So, under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, the Strait of Hormuz is considered a strait used for international navigation. So it would be governed by Article 34 of the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea.
And what does that mean?
That means that traffic should be able to go through there unimpeded by either of the coastal states or all three of the coastal states if you include the UAE. And that those states do have some rights under the UN Convention on Law of the Sea to do, for example, a traffic separation scheme for navigation purposes, for safety, and for environmental purposes. So the coastal states, Iran, Oman, and the UAE have some rights under there, but the commercial traffic should be able to go through there unimpeded. That's what the UN Convention on Law of the Sea would say under Article 34.
Craig, does that also that international law apply for shipping routes, not just Hormuz, but let's say the Malacca Straits, the Panama Canal, Bab al-Mandab in the Red Sea, and the Suez Canal too?
Well, straits are not canals. Straits are the sea. A canal is a different thing. For a canal, you can charge tolls, you can forbid people to use it. You can do with it what you want. It's an artificially man-made thing. A strait is part of the sea, and you should allow traffic through strait, certainly in peacetime. And actually, the stated position of the Iranian government, if that's what they're doing, that everyone is free to use the strait except for hostile states, is the correct legal position in time of war.
So, absolutely. So, Hassan, that brings you in here as well. So, the thing is, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says the Strait of Hormuz is open to everybody except for the enemy. So, the question is, why should Tehran play nice here?
Well, it's basically the peaceful that the professor mentioned is very important concept here. The states have to abide by international law that were mentioned. In peaceful times, when there is a war waged on the country by hostile nations, the coastal state have to take action to preserve the usage of this passage by enemies against its own security. That's by law a right to Iran at this point when it's facing aggression. And the Iranians are saying we are not closing it, and passage is going through, but it's not only about the Iranian position. You know, the war brought insecurity into the strait and the entire region, and insurance skyrocketed, and many ships are not passing through because insurance is not covering their passage. That's also part of the story. So the war is the main thing here. Iran is reacting to it.
Yeah, I mean, insurance costs have gone up from, I think, $250,000 per vessel going through the strait from before the conflict to anywhere between $5 and $10 million now. But Iran here, Hassan, is really the moment demanding international recognition of its rights over the Strait of Hormuz. What does that mean? Is it sovereignty they're looking for?
It's not sovereignty. See, the U.S. has withdrawn from an agreement they had with the Iranians that was a peace agreement during the first Trump administration. They're practically at war with Iran, and it's not feasible at this point to expect a peace agreement to be signed by the end of this aggression. So there won't be peace. The Iranians are saying unless and until there's peace, official peace recognized by the international community, we have to control what is passing through that might hurt us. And that passage might be used to refurbish and bring in more arms into US bases to be used against us. That's basically the logic of the Iranian position. And that recognition is the recognition of the international law that the Iranians are demanding.
Rockford, the UK arranged a meeting of some 40 countries to try and arrange some sort of secure, safe throughput through the strait here. Is that even possible?
Yeah, great question. So I think the short answer is yes, but we are still in the fog of war, certainly for the next 2 to 3 weeks. I'll add a couple of other things just because I do think it'll help the conversation. So the marine insurance markets, that's something I wrote my PhD dissertation about. They have been reestablished, but the tankers are still not going through, except for a very few sort of brave tanker owners. The Greeks went through kind of in the early days, and we've seen some traffic going through again now. Now, under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, who is going through that? A ship is represented by the flag it flies. And this is, I think, very important for our conversation of who is considered by the IRGC to be an enemy in this conflict that they're having. Certainly, United States and Israeli flag tankers, I think, would be governed very differently than, say, Chinese or Japanese or Philippines. And that's a mix of countries that are not really in this conflict, but there are some U.S. allies, of course, like Japan and the Philippines, that are very much affected by what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz.
You have 3 different options here. You say you've got an IRGC option, an international option, and an Omani option. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so along the northern part of the strait, of course, that would be in Iranian waters, including in territorial waters. They're having tankers go very close to Larak Island and going through Iranian territorial waters, and that is with permission of the IRGC. And there is we hear that there's a toll collected about $2 million per tanker, but that's a bilateral negotiation between, say, a Chinese tanker and therefore the Chinese government and Iran. Or an Indian or Pakistani tanker, for example. The other option, the Omani option to the far south, so the southern coast of the Strait of Hormuz is in Omani territorial waters. And so we've seen a French vessel just in the last 24 hours make that passage. Unclear if they had permission from the Iranians or not, still too early to tell. And then in between the IRGC option to the north and the Omani option to the south is what was historically, I would say certainly before February 28th, where most of the tankers were passing, which is in the traffic separation scheme that was would have been governed by that Article 34 under the UN Convention on Law of the Sea.
When you look at this, Craig, for instance, the thing is, how can you try possibly to achieve freedom of movement here without military escalation?
Well, you're not going to in a war. I think you have to be realistic. There's very complex war going on, and it's not plain entirely who are the belligerents and the roles of other Gulf states which are hosting U.S. military bases, for example. It makes that a rather grey area. But I want to just say that there's a tremendous hypocrisy about this. The Western world has got very upset about freedom of navigation all of a sudden, but they weren't at all worried about the Israeli blockade of Gaza, which has gone on for something like 15 years, or the US blockade of Cuba, which is starving people at the moment, or the US seizures of tankers out of Venezuela, which is the reason I'm in Caracas just now. When the West decides to suddenly become very excited by the principles of international law and freedom of navigation, and when it ignores them entirely, is something which I think really ought to be inserted into this conversation, because it's a very important point.
Yeah, it is. So is there a viable military option in your view here, Craig?
No. Well, the only way you could, if Iran wishes to close the strait, the only way you could prevent that would be to occupy coastal Iran for quite a long distance back, because anti-ship missiles are quite simple things. So no, essentially there is none. And the idea that a navy is going to risk anti-ship missiles by forcing the straits, and essentially is simply crazy in this day and age. And even the US Fifth Fleet, which is nominally based at Bahrain, has run away. It's not in the Gulf. The Fifth Fleet is nowhere to be seen. It's well over the horizon, out of range of American missiles. So the idea that there's a military solution to this is simply nuts.
What would likely be the case if there was a viable military solution? I'm just putting it out there. And how well equipped is the IRGC to defend itself?
Well, I think you have to look at what the United States is doing to see if there is a viable option. The closest U.S. aircraft carrier is 1,200 kilometers away from Iran's territorial waters. That's happening for a reason. Otherwise, they would have came and opened it. That's the mightiest navy in the world. What other countries can do about it? That's Iran's prerogative because it's on its territorial water. It has the dominance over it, and it can, stop the U.S. from changing that. But to add to Craig's list of violations of international law, the entirety of this war is illegal. We have a president bragging about war crimes hitting infrastructure in Iran, war crimes by definition, and yet when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, they're talking about the international law. Though the international law allows Iran to basically monitor what's going on in and out, it's not only about hostile nations not passing. The Iranians are saying you have to coordinate with us to see what's coming in and out, because that might be used against us. It's wartime. We can't just allow you to use it. So I don't see a viable military option. That's why there is a focus on the legality of Iran's action in the Strait. But even in the legal terms, Iran has the upper hand. They cannot force it.
Okay, let me just push that to Craig again. Now, one of the biggest losers in this conflict has been international law. And, countries like the US, Israel, and even Iran have largely ignored it. So if one was to get a set of guiding principles from this group of 40 countries meeting, what would be the point of that? Because nobody's following international law anymore, it would seem.
Yes, there's a draft Security Council resolution to mandate states under Chapter 7 to open the strait. But the draft resolution doesn't do it. You still wouldn't militarily be able to do it without an enormous use of force. Ever since the Gaza genocide started, we've seen collapse of international law in a way that's extremely sad to many people, because international law is very important, and the principle of a passage through straits is extremely important. Otherwise, we'll start to see other straits closed. We might see the UK start to refuse passage to Russian ships heading round from the Baltic, for example. I do think it's worth maintaining. And I would say, I entirely accept that Iran is the victim of an unprovoked aggression. But I am pleased that Iran is acknowledging the principle of international law, and it ought still to allow neutral vessels through the strait. And I do hope a way is found of expediting that as well as possible. To blame Iran for the situation when the entire war is not Iran's fault is really a bit rich.
Rockford, the same question to you. If they came out with a set of principles, given the climate, who's really going to obey them?
Okay, well, so I agree that international law has kind of been one of the big losers in this conflict. I agree with that. But I have some respectful disagreements with my other panelists on a few other things. So in addition to the Law of the Sea course that I teach at the Fletcher School, I also teach a maritime geopolitics class. And as a former commodities trader, I have a sense of kind of where things could go. I do think that the strait can be open militarily. What we're facing here is what I call my class is asymmetric warfare, which the IRGC is very capable in. And they have a lot of very strong weapons that they can use to disrupt commercial traffic through the strait. There are approximately 5,000 mines, we've heard through multiple sources. They have their anti-ship cruise missiles. They still have a lot of anti-ship ballistic missiles. They have a lot of drones, including those with fiber optic cables, so they can't be jammed. So they have a lot of tools to bear. The United States has repositioned a lot of the A-10 Warthogs, which historically been used as an anti-tank weapon, but those could also be used over the strait as an anti-small boat weapon. They could also fly over the northern coastline of the Strait of Hormuz and very much disrupt those asymmetric operations that the IRGC would be doing. And I do think my fellow panelists raised, I think, one of the critical issues, which is who is non-belligerent and can pass through any of those three options, the IRGC option to the north, the Omani option to the south, or the international strait option that may be bolstered by a UN Security Council resolution today sponsored by Bahrain. So I think that we're in the fog of war. It's very complicated. Politics and international law are playing with each other. And I do agree that I think international law is the big loser here, unfortunately.
Actually, just to you, Craig, it's interesting, but who is a non-belligerent? Because, for instance, sitting here in Qatar, and of course the UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, they didn't start it. They're getting attacked by Iran, but they've not been belligerents at all.
Well, that's an open question. It was interesting, but warthogs were mentioned, and the warthogs have been active and have been attacking Iranian military vessels. But a warthog is not a long-range aircraft. They must be operating out of some of the Gulf states. They have to be. Things are happening. But truth is the first casualty of war. We all know, and some of the Gulf states are more involved than they are saying. Karg Island was hit by HIMARS. They, again, are not a long-range weapon. They must have been fired from out of the Gulf states. So it's very, I can see from Iran, it's interesting because nobody in the world who with any sense wants to see an open war between Iran and its Gulf neighbours. And thankfully, all kinds of diplomatic dances are done to avoid that happening. But on the other hand, the Gulf states are involved in this war. They do host United States forces. And the notion that attacks haven't been occurring out of those states doesn't really hold up, I'm afraid, to close inspection.
Hassan, I just want to pivot here to this Iranian toll system where the IRGC is going to be extracting bills in yuan, we understand, and cryptocurrency for ships to go through. What more can you tell us about this?
Well, it's not clear so far. There's a law that is being worked on in Iran for the management of the strait they're talking about, because management in the way that Iran is doing, and at this point, their bases are being hit by the Americans and the Israelis managing the strait. That would be a resource consuming, and the Iranians would take a toll to manage that strait. That's the Iranian mentality about it. Now, we don't know. There are conflicting reports how it's being managed, but within the law that is being worked on, countries using to pass through the Strait of Hormuz have to pay a toll for the management of the strait with the Iranian rial. That is, they have to purchase Iranian rial to pay for the usage of that passage for the Iranian management capacity that is being done there.
To you, Rockford, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said Friday that his country could help unblock the Strait of Hormuz. He didn't say how he'd be able to do it, but he did point to how they were able to open the passage through the Black Sea, which Russia had blocked at the start of the conflict. How would he do it? Or how could he help do it?
Yeah, it's a very interesting angle to this, because I was talking with my students this week about this. I think in some ways, this is not just the U.S.-Israel war with Iran, but it's the U.S.-Israel-Ukraine war with Iran. Because, of course, Iran has been a major supplier of drones to Russia to be used against Ukraine over the last 4 years. And so I think that Zelensky sees an opportunity, and he signed at least 3 10-year agreements with Gulf Cooperation Council countries last weekend for use of anti-drone technology that the Ukrainians have used with great effect against Russia. And so I think that what we're going to see here is a further division of the Gulf between the Gulf Cooperation Council countries really hardening their defenses using a combination of Ukrainian technology, United States technology, and maybe Israeli technology to be able to not suffer the kind of attacks that they've suffered so far from Iran over the last 30 plus days.
Craig, very briefly, same question.
It's interesting because you can look at it another way as well, in that the Ukrainian experience shows the vulnerability of shipping, because Ukraine has been able to inflict very large damages on the Russian Navy using land-to-sea missiles. So looking at the Black Sea experience also shows how difficult it is to keep shipping going when you have a hostile coastal state. So that one cuts both ways.
Right, Hassan, final word from you here. Now, this is the big question. How does this, after we can get through the fog of war, how does this all end?
I think it ends with an agreement. It should. Otherwise, we will have a constant hostility, cycles of wars or conflicts erupting between Iran, Israel, and the United States. The US and Iran, after this war, need to sit and talk about a peaceful resolution. Otherwise, I can't see any other option but conflict moving forward, because obviously their interests at this point are conflicting. With regards to the GCC countries, I think they need to talk to the Iranians as well as the Americans. Actually, if they didn't have these military assets of the CENTCOM in their countries, they wouldn't have been attacked. The last time Iran attacked any of its neighbors was 3 centuries ago, and it's reacting. So I think instead of banking on outside sources to secure themselves, I think talking with their neighbors and remedying the concerns their neighbors have would help a lot.
But how likely is that to happen, very quickly?
I think there's a bigger chance between Iran and the GCC for that to go ahead than that of Iran.
Surely.
Of course, it increased, and it goes both ways. Iranian trust in the GCC has dropped because of the usage of their lands and seas against Iran, and their trust because of Iran's attacks on U.S. assets in this region. And that is being added to the already lacking trust or less trust that is between the two. So they need to work on rebuilding a trust and finding common ground for the security of this waterway.
Hassan, thank you. Thanks to our guests, Hassan, Ahmadian, Rockford, Weitz, and Craig Murray. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is AJ Inside Story. That's it from me, Rishaad, Salamat, and the whole team right here in Doha. Stay with us for more coverage of the continuing war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. That's all coming up in just a moment.